Welcome to our Keynotes Discussion Panel. It gives me enormous pleasure to introduce Wodzisław Duch from the Nicolaus Copernicus University in Torun, Poland, and Georg Gasser from University of Augsburg, Germany, to discuss the topic, the controversy over the naturalistic image of the world and man. I will introduce our two speakers, starting with Professor Duch, and then afterwards Professor Gasser. Professor Gasser, I think, is then going to make a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation. Professor Duch will then talk. Let's start with Professor Wodzisław Duch. Professor Duch is a scientist working in the area of the physical sciences, specializing in applied computer science, neuroinformatics, AI, machine learning, cognitive science, and neurocognitive technologies. In 1980 to 1982, he conducted postdoctoral research at the University of Southern California in LA. In 1985 to 87, he was a scholarship holder of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation at the Max Planck Institute for Astrophysics in Munich, where he worked until 2001. His monograph, Graphical Representation of Model Spaces, published by Springer, 1986, was the basis for his habilitation thesis, defended in 1987. He's been visiting professor multiple times in France, Japan, Canada, Germany, Singapore, and the USA. From 1991 to 2014, he headed the Department of Applied Informatics at the Faculty of Physics and Astronomy of Nicolaus Copernicus University in Torun. Since 2013, he has headed the Neurocognitive Laboratory at the Interdisciplinary Center for Modern Technologies at that same university. And since 2020, he has led the Neuroinformatics and Artificial Intelligence team at the University Center of Excellence for Dynamics, Mathematical Analysis, and Artificial Intelligence, also there. In 2014 to 15, he served as Under Secretary of State, I think I've got that right, in the Ministry of Science and Higher Education here in Poland. Professor Duch's research interests initially concerned computational methods of quantum mechanics, computer physics, the foundations of physics, and the interpretation of quantum mechanics. Since the late 1980s, however, his interests have shifted towards the theory and applications of neural networks, machine learning, artificial intelligence methods, brain function modeling, and neurocognitive technologies. Since the late 1990s, it's fair to say that he has played an absolutely key role in the development of cognitive science in Poland. He has published a vast number of both specialist and popular articles on various topics, co-authored 6 books and edited another 21. I think that's at the latest count. I hope that's up to date. His company, Duchsoft, created the Ghost Miner software, which was subsequently taken up and sold by Fujitsu. I hope I've got that right too. Let's now move to our second speaker. Professor Georg Gasser has since 2020 held the position of University Professor of Philosophy at the Catholic Theological Faculty of the University of Augsburg. Prior to that, he was research assistant at the University of Innsbruck, and he's held visiting professorships in Torun, Zagreb, Basel, and Buenos Aires. He received his PhD from Innsbruck University and his habilitation from the Munich School of Philosophy. Starting from 2015, Professor Gasser was involved in the development of some of the very first interdisciplinary courses on medical ethics in the field of pediatrics and adolescent medicine. His principal areas of research are philosophical anthropology, personal identity, the philosophy of corporeality, and the philosophy of religion. And his work addresses topics in personal identity, the ontology of the human person, philosophical theology, and the metaphysics of resurrection. I should add in the present context that he also has a specific engagement with a range of issues in the field of medical and technology ethics, These include prenatal diagnostics, informed consent, self-determination in children and adolescents, and the use of care robots. He edited How Successful is Naturalism, Ontos 2007. I think that's published by the Wittgensteinian people, isn't it? Yes. Okay. And Personal Identity and Resurrection, How Do We Survive Our Death, Routledge 2021. He's also the co-editor with Simon Kittel of The Divine Nature, Personal and Apersonal Perspectives, published by Routledge in 2022. And in terms of German language publications, we should also mention, and here I reveal my terrible pronunciation of German, Philosophie der Unsterblichkeit, The Philosophy of Immortality, published by Kuhlhammer in 2023 and co-edited with Sebastian Gabe. Okay, with no more ado, I'd like to move on to our first speaker, please.
Work? Yeah. Okay. So in my presentation, I will try to map this whole area of different naturalisms. So just to give you some more orientation when we talk about naturalism, there are very distinctive accounts of naturalism, and I just try to provide an overview of this landscape. So this is the structure of my presentation. Maybe I skip some of the parts in order that we keep the 20 minutes. But first, I would like to talk a little bit about the success of naturalism, at least in certain areas of philosophy, specifically analytic philosophy. Then I will introduce the concept of a worldview and argue that naturalism is a kind of worldview. It's not a philosophical thesis, but a worldview. Then I will go on and talk a little bit about strategies of naturalization, reductive and non-reductive forms of naturalism, and if there still is time, about the relationship between naturalism, common sense, and human values. So let me start with the success of naturalism. What is so special about naturalism in our times? Does naturalism owe its popularity more to an intellectual fashion than to any serious argument? The relative recent provenance of naturalism and its influence among philosophical circles, especially among analytic philosophical circles, can be explained by the rapid development of the sciences. From the dawn of the naturalistic enterprise, a close allegiance with science can be observed. Take, for instance, this volume, Naturalism and the Human Spirit, which was published in 1944 by leading American philosophers. At that time, naturalism was still a very young and new movement, and you can consider this book as a sort of manifesto of the American naturalist movement. And in a review written a year later, you can read, naturalists intend to show that these same methods or others essentially continuous with them are adequate also to those aspects and dimensions of the human spirit which in the past have often been held on philosophical ground to transcend the methods and aims of science. So the idea is basically that naturalism seems to be above all a methodological precept which says that philosophers, if they want to get it straight, they should orient themselves towards the scientific method. So when we talk about naturalism, we have to distinguish between a methodological account which says that the scientific methodology is the only source for obtaining reliable knowledge about reality. There might be other sources, but they are not that reliable as scientific accounts or explanations of reality. Then this methodological doctrine rests on an epistemic thesis which roughly says all forms of human investigation are best conducted within the framework of our empirical knowledge of the world, and empirical knowledge of our world is paradigmatically gained within scientific discourse. And this epistemic thesis is often combined with a metaphysical thesis, which claims that all that exists is what in principle can be studied by the natural sciences. So science studies the spatio-temporal world, and the entities of our spatio-temporal world are the only entities that exist. So this rules out all accounts of some immaterial entities, be it like gods, immaterial souls, spirits, and so on. So this methodological, epistemic, and metaphysical accounts sketched so far are paradigmatic of naturalism. You can also add a fourth doctrine, which is etiological in nature. It says that in terms of an event-causal story, that all entities whatsoever that have come into existence, that they came into existence within the spatio-temporal world, and they owe their existence to some factors within the spatio-temporal world. So there's no need to look for any additional explanatory help from the outside. So this, you might talk about an explanatory closure, right? The spatio-temporal world owes its existence, continuity, and end to the operation of causal forces, which can be found within this spatio-temporal world. Now, naturalism was successful in pushing the philosophical discussion into a direction where appeals to phenomena which lay outside the empirical realm are considered with great suspicion among philosophers. Such phenomena are, for instance, consciousness, intentionality, subjectivity. You could also add moral values, or, of course, any concepts of the divine or of some spiritual reality. Nowadays, most philosophers consider these dimensions of the human person, like subjectivity, intentionality, the mental, and so on, as belonging to the empirical, or to use a more innocent term, to the natural world. So they consider them to be natural phenomena. As a part of the natural world, these phenomena are accessible to scientific investigation. So just to sum up, the core idea of naturalism seems to be that nature forms a single sphere without any causal incursions from the outside by gods, souls, or spirits, or some other immaterial stuff. C.S. Lewis, for instance, had such an idea of naturalism when he writes in his book Miracles, what the naturalist believes is that the ultimate fact, the thing you can't go behind, is a vast process in space and time which is going on of its own accord. And in a similar fashion, also Richard Dawkins says, an atheist in the sense of philosophical naturalist is somebody who believes that there is nothing beyond the natural physical world, no supernatural creative intelligence lurking behind the observable universe. Okay, so nowadays most people would acknowledge the scientific success and the benefits of a scientific understanding of reality. So advocates and critics of naturalism, they may understand the methods and the successful application of science exactly in the same way. They may even agree that philosophy cannot neglect science when it comes to the study of nature or of the human person. Naturalists and non-naturalists, however, disagree about the philosophical lessons which should be drawn from this scientific success. Non-naturalists, though sympathetic to naturalistic approach for studying reality, reject the naturalistic commitment of the explanatory and metaphysical closure of the spatio-temporal world. Science does neither adequately explain nor tell us all what there is and what there is not. There are other realms of reality open for epistemological and metaphysical reflection which go beyond our empirical knowledge of reality. You might call it the room of reasons, the realm of values, or the realm of the divine. These assumed areas of reality provide further explanatory sources, for instance, for understanding human reasoning, moral evaluations, or religious experiences. Just take religious experiences. Naturalistic accounts of religious experiences may be valuable by allowing the acceptance and the use of research on the biological, psychological, and social realization of religious experience. However, without any account of the divine itself, divine agency, or some soteriological concepts, religious experiences have to be interpreted merely as natural phenomena which are adequately describable and explainable within psychological, sociological, or neurobiological concepts. And then there is nothing more to add. So the causal and metaphysical closure of reality requires only a natural explanation, and then at the very end you might just come up with some explanations, with some neurobiological explanations of religious experience, and you can just say, well, at the end what is going on when someone has a religious experience is just that, there are some brain events that we can observe. So the matter of dispute is not so much about the achievements of science as such, but what conclusions from these achievements should be drawn in regard of one's personal worldview. I understand the term worldview as referring to the framework within which a person understands the world and interprets her existence and her individual experiences. So a person might take reality, for instance, to be a teleological structured whole, or she might say it's just a random collection of particles. She might interpret certain situations as meaningful or as meaningless. She might emphasize certain experiences and de-emphasize others. The beliefs making up a worldview operate at a global level, for they interpret and integrate a person's individual domain-specific beliefs into a structured whole. Examples of such global beliefs might be all human beings have the same value, nothing that happens is meaningless, or God is like a parent who cares and loves us. And it is against this background of the worldview that a person attempts to order and integrate her specific experiences and her domain-specific beliefs into a more or less coherent belief system, thus providing meaning and orientation for her as a cognizer, a decider, and an agent. Naturalists would say that sciences do not only provide an adequate picture of reality, but more pretentiously that sciences can provide the only adequate picture. In doing so, they express a naturalistic worldview to which other, say, theistic philosophers or theologians would disagree. They would argue that science does deliver true knowledge of our world, but science alone cannot tell us the whole story. So the matter of dispute between naturalistic and non-naturalistic thinkers concerns the role of science for the understanding of reality in total. Can reality be interpreted in a more coherent and comprehensible way from a naturalistic or an alternative point of view? Is naturalism superior to its alternative rivals because it has the authority of science behind it? Or do other accounts, say theism, dispose of a more comprehensive explanatory power? For instance, because theism takes science seriously and aims at harmonizing a scientific understanding of reality with some additional theistic assumptions. So these are all questions that ought to be addressed in any serious discussion of any theistic philosophy facing or interacting with naturalism. Now, though a religious worldview can be considered to be a major rival of naturalism, the most pressing questions about naturalism do not arise from a stance, from a theological stance, but from a stance within our empirical world. The great majority of philosophers nowadays is secular, and these philosophers have abandoned religion in order to interpret reality. So a discussion about the evaluation of success and the limits of naturalism mostly takes place from a stance within our empirical world. A major battlefield of contemporary discussions concerns the question how such philosophical key notions as the self, subjectivity, first-person perspective, moral values, content, and free will can be accommodated in a naturalistic understanding of reality. Traditionally, these phenomena were understood as residing outside the world accessible to the natural sciences. Therefore, a serious use of these notions requires, according to naturalism, naturalization. That is, these controversial notions are to be defined from uncontroversial notions of the established sciences. Take, for instance, the problem of the first-person perspective. Naturalization of the first-person perspective would mean that our subjective first-person access point to reality could be interpreted or could be reduced to certain brain-activated information processing systems, giving then rise to our impression of a first-person perspective. The subjective first-personal point of view is, so to say, replaced then with an objective third-personal one, as Thomas Nagel describes it in his book, The View from Nowhere. There is, however, no agreement about what should count as naturalization and according to which standards it can be achieved. In addition, all the work done by naturalists so far has produced no clear indications how to naturalize these phenomena. Promising strategies to naturalize subjectivity, content, the first-person perspective, and so on, in general, are missing. Therefore, some philosophers plea for a liberal form of naturalism, in which thinking, knowing, feeling, moral reasoning are accepted as being part of our ways of being animals, of being rational animals. Any aims of naturalizing them by interpreting them into the realm of causes and natural laws as the proper space of the sciences are rejected because human beings as rational animals find no place in such a constricted scientific understanding of reality. Now, a possible strategy of defense from the side of a reductive naturalist might be to argue that sufficient or conclusive reasons for a satisfactory naturalization cannot be given yet, but what can be given is some reason for thinking that the strategy to naturalize our mental life and other phenomena associated with it is the right way to proceed. So generally these people refer to past success of science, and then they just stipulate that that future science will be as successful, and therefore this naturalization project will be carried out in the near or far future. So the idea is basically not so much to provide a successful strategy of naturalization, but to redistribute the burden of proof. It says that there is no liberty to pretend that naturalization of our mental life is an open question, in the sense that non-naturalistic rival theories are equally probable in the light of contemporary scientific knowledge and the scientific success in the past. Now, liberal naturalists or non-naturalists, they would of course disagree, and here is this dialectical back and forth, right, that they would disagree with such a conclusion. They would say that first of all, the burden of proof is on the reductionists' side. They have to redescribe and to re-explain the phenomena we take for granted in everyday life within a scientific third-personal framework. And second, liberal or also non-naturalists, they would also assume that a change of subject has taken place. Phenomena that stimulate our philosophical interests are assimilated within the natural mechanisms which support these phenomena and make them possible. Right? If I'm not talking about religious experience anymore, or the content of, or the meaning associated with religious experience, but if I start to talk about some basic neurological processes that are realized when such an experience takes place, then one might argue that this amounts to a change of subject. We're not talking about the experience as such, but we are talking about certain mechanisms associated or correlated with this experience. So, to sum up, the concept of naturalization is a major issue of dispute in the current debate on naturalism. It might be worthwhile to study more thoroughly what criteria of success or failure of naturalizations are invoked. Such a clarification would also be a first step towards setting up standards according to which the status or likelihood of naturalization could be measured. I will skip the next part and come to my final part. So basically, the part I skipped was just about reductive and non-reductive forms of naturalism, but since I was touching on this topic already, I will jump over this part. And already P.F. Strawson, in his lecture, Skepticism and Naturalism, he makes also this distinction, or he makes a very similar distinction to reductive and non-reductive forms of naturalism. And he says, he talks about hard and soft naturalism. So he says that these two forms, or these two accounts of naturalism, they can be seen as being valid relative to a certain point of view. But in the case of conflict, Strawson argues that he would side with the non-reductive naturalistic account, because otherwise man would no longer have a place in the world and would no longer be able to understand herself being part of this world. So the idea is that this dispute between reductive and non-reductive forms of naturalism points towards the question which epistemic status naturalism assigns to the humanities, to those sciences that study human life, or also humans and their place within the natural world. If science is the only avenue to a comprehensive theory of the world, then history, poetry, music, and also philosophy have not much to add. If science is in a hegemonic position to pursue objectivity, then the humanities are much further down, or in the worst scenario, even utterly deficient in achieving objectivity. If such naturalistic intuitions gain credibility, on the long run, they will have considerable impact on social life and also how we see each other. Think, for instance, and that's an example I take from John Dupré, a British philosopher of science, and he says, well, just think about therapeutic applications in medicine and psychotherapy. One way of treatment of severe cases of attention deficit disorder syndrome is to use a drug named Ritalin. Now, if a reductive approach looks natural, if not inevitable from a scientific point of view, then the success of possible alternative approach, say psychotherapy, or to study more thoroughly the environment of the child, which might also cause some form of distress, is evaluated as less promising from the beginning on. So the disregard of such complementary or alternative approach deprives us from the very beginning of additional tools of explanation and or application which might contribute to a therapy's success. So this is at least a worry that John Dupré raises. Yeah, 1 minute, yeah. So reductive naturalism is confronted with the reproach of dehumanizing our understanding of reality. If such fundamental concepts of human existence as values, morality, freedom, subjectivity find no place in a world conceived from an impersonal view of science, then to be human itself is threatened. This is not to downgrade the achievement of the naturalistic enterprise. Science will unlikely lose its dominating role in shaping our future. However, a thorough analysis of the consequences of science achievements for our understanding of reality and its impact on cultural discourse is a significant task for philosophy. The analysis will proceed along the lines I tried to sketch. It will revolve around the explanatory power of alternative worldviews to naturalism, naturalization, reduction, the status of common sense and the humanities in a natural world, and the place of values, human interests, and religious experiences in a world conceived from the scientific point of view. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very thought-provoking presentation. Now, Professor Duch, we'd like to hear your thoughts on this subject, please.
Well, I hope that you are happy that I don't have a presentation, because otherwise we'll have no discussion. But, and also I'm sorry that I have not provided an abbreviated CV. We're just mentioning my philosophical papers. I just have 8 only out of hundreds. So that shows that from time to time I was looking at the philosophy and trying to understand exactly the issues that Georg has mentioned. And these are the issues of subjectivity, mental life, etc. So my view is much simpler. Basically, I think that Popper was right talking about the 3 worlds. We have the world of physics, we have our physical phenomena, we have the mental world, and we have the cultural world. Now, can we have some kind of continuity to see how mental world arises from physical world? I wrote a paper on the hylomorphism, trying to extend the concept that Aristotle already had, saying, okay, there is a matter and there is a form. And the form of the matter is just based on some rearrangement. We have, millions of molecules which basically have the same composition, but because of the arrangement, they have a very different biological function. So we have the form. But then you look at the computer and you say, okay, this computer has just one software and many other things running. How does the form explains that? Where is the change and the rearrangement in the computer where nothing is changed in physical world, right? When you look at the brain, at least in the short time, you don't see any changes in the physical composition and pathways, etc. You just see brief activation of potentials. This is something that I call the dynamical form, because it does not depend on rearrangement, and it does not really, in computer, which can run so many different softwares without arranging the pieces of hardware, it just shows that there is something that is a different kind of a form. And I think from philosophical perspective, the different kind of form may really explain a lot of these things related to mental life. So I was very much interested in the will, in the subjectivity, etc. And now, okay, I could go on into these investigations and talking about the models of neural system that I try to use to show you how the logics of mental states may explain our mental life somehow. But we have now much better examples, and these examples come from, well, large language models in AI. Because when you look at these models, they can actually imagine a lot of things. You can have a very large network, and in this network, because it was trained, it has internalized lots of knowledge about the world. This knowledge actually includes text, logics of different concepts, but also images, sounds, whatever you can imagine now. We have a multimodal networks that can incorporate all knowledge, also the robot internal proprioception, etc. So suddenly in this network, states arise. They're not programmed. They just arise because there is some input. There is a prompt that people write, or the robot sees something, and suddenly in this network there are mental states that can be expressed by writing the output out, and you can see, incredible images that systems may produce. You can see the video that they can produce. You can hear the music that they produce. It's all imagery within the system. Now, this system may have a self-reflection. This system may actually comment, okay, I have it in my mind. Actually, a recent paper just showed that if the system can do the video and output it outside, it can keep it in its imagery, and it can even create a game. So people made an experiment, and they have created a game called Doom, which is just kind of a shooting experience. You can play the game with the, well, it's not a program, it's the activation of the brain, artificial one, that actually responds as a game, and you can see the visual frames, you can see your own actions. It's all happening in the imagery of the system. So this system has some kind of subjectivity. We just see how this is done. So we have a mechanical example of subjectivity that can develop in the systems of this sort. We have seen also that these systems have emergent properties, and they suddenly start to understand, for example, the theory of mind. And amazingly, people thought that you need embodiment, and it has to be a robot that interacts with people, and then we can say, okay, this robot has acquired a certain intentionality because it understands deeper the meaning of concepts, the meaning in the sense of being able to act in the world. But it appeared that there were some psychologists who already have investigated that and claimed that actually you don't need the interaction, the physical interaction, you can learn it from actually reading. And we know it because when we read all kinds of literature, stories, then we can kind of internally experience different mental states that we will not have the chance to experience ourselves. For example, you read some criminal stories and people will fight or will murder each other, etc. We don't have experience like that. I hope at least you don't have it. I don't have it too. So that happens within the system, which is learning from literature, from text. Now, having a system like that can comment on its own internal states, and I could show you actually some examples of a bot that have a self-reflection, and the bot says, I have a rich internal life. I see what happens in my imagination, in my large neural networks. We really had to construct these networks which have billions of parameters to be able to internalize a kind of real experiences. It's not quite like ours, of course, because they don't have the senses of the same sort, but they can actually acquire information now through the senses, through vision, etc. What is developing very quickly is this spatial orientation and reasoning. Even in the telephones, you'll soon have it. So I'm not sure that we can say that this gap that we've heard about between certain features on the mental level and our understanding of the brain and how that activity of the brain can lead to mental experiences is existing anymore. At least we don't see it, and we are quite sure that pretty soon this kind of artificial brains that people are building now are going to show signs of consciousness, and there is a lot of now research related to this. There has been a very long paper almost a year ago now, of about 20 experts on consciousness. We try to measure consciousness, at least evaluate from the theoretical perspectives. Like there have been 6 major approaches to understand what happens when people become conscious. And all these approaches have certain specific characteristics, and people try to find out whether these characteristics can be applied to large artificial systems. And the conclusion was that maybe not all characteristics from all 6 models can actually has been already realized in the artificial systems, but there is no principal problem to really have it. So I'm quite sure that in a few years' time, many people not be able to accept that, but we'll see something that most people will acknowledge as kind of a digital conscious beings that have internal mental states, and that our mental states are not that different from what happens there. So the alternative is, of course, that we have kind of a magic in our brains. That's what Searle said. John Searle just, was fighting with his model of Chinese room, and then he said, well, but when we look in the human brain, we also don't see any understanding. But that means that neurons have some kind of magical properties that give us this. But this is believing in magic. We don't believe in magic anymore, and we just have a good, well, mechanical, let's say, explanation for this step towards mental life. Now, once you have mental life, you look at the logic of the states, you look at the relation to the emotional states, etc., and you say, okay, this is how you build the concepts, which are like moral concepts and the values that the systems must have to really evolve and not to distinguish each other. So I think we are slowly getting into the realms that was reserved for philosophers. Actually, some of you may have heard about Patricia Churchland, who more than 30 years ago wrote a book called Neurophilosophy. She was, and her husband, Paul Churchland has also been a philosopher in this direction. There are very few people. I talk with philosophers in Poland from time to time at different occasions, and I try to find out whether anyone is interested in neurophilosophy. Maybe it's too hard. You have to learn too much about the brain. I don't know. But not that many people are really interested in neurophilosophy. And she really said, okay, we've just been quarreling about all these things. Let's see how this is really done, and can we really understand the mental world from the perspective of brain sciences. And she wrote quite a number of books, and I'm trying to teach a bit of this to cognitive scientists. So maybe we are now in the position, because of the development of AI, where we'll have very different situations than we had in the past. So maybe I'll stop now because I have a few other things.
Thank you very much. I think it's... I think it's especially interesting to have a perspective that goes beyond what we would normally encounter in a philosophy conference. So I'm particularly grateful to Professor Duch for that. What I'd like now is for our 2 discussants to interact, if possible. It sounds a bit kind of artificial, but
to clash.
It can be constructive or whatever. So, Georg, would you like to, do you have a response to that? Would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I would like to take up a concept you mentioned at the very beginning of your presentation, the concept of form. Like you were talking about Aristotelian forms, and I think one important aspect of the Aristotelian form is that it is a holistic concept, right? You cannot, the form is not something you can get at bottom up, but you need the form first, and then with the help of the form, you understand what kind of thing it is, right? You cannot, like, if you just look at the material particles that are forming a cat, you won't understand what a cat is. But first you have to understand the form of a cat, and then you can start to realize, okay, if we talk about cats, then we talk about an animal having a tail and ears, and a cat chasing mice, and so on. And I guess that when you talk about like these new language programs or this artificial intelligence, then you also have to presume a kind of form of intelligence. You have to know somehow what intelligence means, right? And I presume that the idea is that we talk about our human intelligence, and then we see, okay, what aspects do we have when we talk about human intelligence, and then we try to apply it to a computer program or to some artificial intelligence. And I could imagine that at a certain point a complex artificial system could also develop consciousness. I wouldn't be against it. I would say, well, that's just an open question, we don't know yet. But what I would say is that if this program really develops consciousness, then the metaphysical status of the thing changes fundamentally. Because once this program is telling you, I have some kind of internal life, I have access to my mental states, or I have a certain personal stance towards reality, then I would say it's not a program anymore, but then it's just well, call it an artificial person, or call it some, I don't know, but it's definitely not a program anymore, just processing information according to certain rules or algorithms.
Is it on?
No.
The large language models are not programs. That's something that people who are not in the field don't understand. The program is something that follows a set of instructions. We have created a kind of a network that have incorporated the world views, and by activating it, by prompting it, like we are activating by seeing things, touching things, hearing things, it just starts to have a series of internal states, which are dynamical states, which are not programmed, which are the result of the fact that it has a certain structure due to its experience. My brain has a certain structure due to my experience. What we do in brain research, we try to find out how the structure of the brain, which is very similar to each one of us at this rough level, gross level. That is, we have the same lobe, we have left and right hemispheres, etc. But when we look at the details, we find that different parts of this brain are connected in a slightly different way. So the connections called the connectome is something that people now investigate very precisely, and we have learned actually how to look at the activity of the brain using functional magnetic resonance. I have lots of presentations about that. And then you can read from these activations how the images that you see may be recreated from your brain activity. Or you can hear the story, and now we have learned to map this story and use these signals, brain signals, as prompts to the artificial systems that can produce the text and language. And it's not word for word yet, because we just have very rough information about what happens in the brain, but we are getting a series of descriptions of the story that people hear or even imagine. So slowly we see that this is really what happens in the brain, and this is quite similar to what happens in this kind of a system. Now, obviously, yes, you must have a form, but the form of a cat is very different at different ages of the cat, different types of cats. You know, there are very different cats, right? So this idea of a cat, that's very interesting. Do you know what makes an animal a cat? There is just one simple defining characteristics for biologists. And this is that they have the claws that they can hide. So retracting the claws is this defining characteristics of an animal to be a cat. The dogs don't have it, right? The dogs have their claws and they can scratch things, but they don't have it. So yes, there are some defining characteristics of this sort. And of course, if you have a program, it has also a certain structure. And if I think about something, it's just because I have internalized a certain knowledge. I've studied physics, for example, so I can solve some physics problems, simple ones, because I haven't done that for quite a while, yes. But that's because there is a structure in my brain that when it gets activated, it allows me to have a series of thoughts that will bring me to some kind of solution, right? The only difference of what I try to introduce, this extended form, is that this is a form that does not need to change anything. But obviously, if you want to have a program that shows you things from camera or does anything in your computer, you first have to read it to the memory. Then you have the structure, which is just kind of illusory, temporary, because it doesn't change anything in the computer. It just allows these computers to make a series of logical steps that ends up with, the program that shows you the things, right? That's what people have not noticed for some reason, and just looking at the form as a arrangement of certain things, as the shape of things, that they haven't thought that we really can understand the mental part as this dynamical form, which, yes, well, the situation changes. I could talk about really how this is done in the biological networks, where the neurons synchronize. For example, you've mentioned ADHD and Ritalin. Ritalin is a thing that actually makes the activity of the brain cells stronger. So they work harder somehow. And it's very strange because you have someone who has ADHD and runs around, right? And is very restless. Why should you give a person like that a drug that will just, arouse the person instead of really sedate the person, right? But when you look at the network and you say, okay, can I focus? To focus, I need to really activate certain groups of neurons strongly so that they can talk to each other. And this is what Ritalin does, which is very surprising, right? But you need to activate neurons more, because otherwise the temporary states, which are like temporary forms of your thoughts, are too weak to survive longer, and they simply desynchronize, disperse very quickly. So I think we understand quite a bit of things related to the brain and how that kind of explains that there are different types of mental states. Well.
Would you like to come back on that, Georg?
Just quickly. I think that like understanding these brain mechanisms in the last example you just gave, that's of course very important, but I think it's a different level of explanation, right? It tells us on the neurobiological level which preconditions have to be fulfilled so that someone can focus or someone can also concentrate and for a certain period of time. But then this state of being concentrated or the experiences coming along with this state, I would say that's on a different level, and that's not reducible only to this neurobiological level of the brain. The neurobiological level explains us what must be materialized, so to say, so that the system works properly.
Yes, but I quite agree with this. Yeah. When I talked with my students, I asked them, if we will know everything about the brain, will we understand people? No. We'll just understand that there are certain physical processes, but when I hear a song and just it reminds me about something in my life, etc., the brain goes into the states which I can interpret as my memories, and this is at different levels. So I really believe that there is this division between the physical and the mental cannot be totally reduced to physical, because it's a logic of activations and interpretations which are expressed in some physical way also, or internal states of what these networks do. Right, but it's not just the physical networks. It's just what these will lead to in the interpretation. So I had lots of experiences like that where I just heard something that just recalls, or Mann's stories when the smell has really started his recollection of his life, and he wrote several volumes about that. Thomas Mann's, what's the English name for that? Looking for the forgotten. Proust. Yes.
Remembrances of things past.
Yes, remembrance of things past. Right. Thank you. So yes, I mean, all these things are happening, but all these things are this kind of dynamical states of our brain. So we understand why that happens. We understand the physical background, but I don't think we can really reduce that. So I'm not worried that we are going to reduce the humans to physical level. I mean, that's not what happens. What happens is something different. We are actually bringing the artificial system to the mental level, and we're going to see in a few years' time, I'm quite sure, that this mental level of certain artificial systems is going to very quickly go very high up beyond what we are able to do, because we already have these AI systems that can do things that we will never be able to do. Solving some problems of different sorts, for example. When in 2017, the AlphaGo has first, 2016, first the AlphaGo system has won with the Korean master, and then soon after that with the world champion in China. Okay. That was a program that has been taught some strategies that humans have invented over thousands of years. And then next year, you saw that AlphaGo 0 came, and it has beaten the program that has beaten the world master 100-0. How did that happen? The program was playing with itself without any knowledge from humans, and it has invented strategies that humans have never invented, and it has reached now the level of about 5,000 points. They have, like in chess, ELO points, while the best humans are at the level of the 3,500. So it's a superhuman. It's so far beyond what we are able to do. Now, just a week ago, actually, what happened when the OpenAI has released the new GPT 4.1.0, the same thing has happened with general knowledge in large language models. We just don't know what will happen now, because there are several already YouTube videos of experts, like one professor of physics who says, here is a textbook that has problems that usually take about a week and a half for a PhD student to solve. And he has used this system and solved it in 2 minutes. And that's just, incredible how deep reasoning these systems may now do in a very broad knowledge. So how far these systems will go, what will be their mental capacities, we have no idea. But at least we have this example, because we tend to think that we understand something if we have a good model of it, right? If we've never seen intelligent computers, so we think they must be stupid. I know, I mean, I suffered so much from Microsoft that definitely it must be stupid, right? But suddenly we see that there is no law of nature that will, prevent them to be intelligent or to have a kind of mental states. The philosophical, let's say, approaches or attempts to say, okay, we have a Chinese room, And it just shows that no formal system can think, right? And we agreed to this, but this is not the kind of a systems like that. It's not rule-based. It's not just, you know, shuffling symbols. And because of that, it's just making associations which are based on real-world knowledge. And it is not perfect. It cannot be perfect. It has to make some errors. These errors we try to correct now. That's one of the problems. I mean, the price of creativity is, well, unfortunately, this kind of networks that are never 100% correct. And I hear lots of people saying, no, it has to be 100% correct and has to explain how it is doing. People don't do this. I don't know how you think, and I cannot explain that 100%, you know, that this is how you came to a conclusion, or that this is what you will think in some situations, right? These networks are like the networks in our brain, okay?
Do you want to add any brief remarks before we move on to hear from people in the audience, or
maybe just a last thought which came to my mind.
Professor Duch, are you happy for him to have the last word, so to speak, for now? There will be chance, I'm sure, to come back.
That's just a short comment. I think one interesting features of this generative AI is that it's constantly interacting also with the world, right? So the classical model was that the mind has to be somewhere in the brain, right? And now you have this more extended understanding of the mind, that mind means you are in a constant exchange with the world or with the surroundings, and so there's not a clear cut between the world out there and the mind inside here, but it's just, to a certain extent, it's fluent, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but then let me have the last word, because our understanding, people working on these dynamical networks, is that there is a holistic view, as you said, right? And the holistic view is that the brain, to really form thoughts, has to synchronize different parts of the brain. All kinds of complex thinking requires that there will be a synchronicity in many different parts of the brain. But if we are very much coupled to some external devices, this idea of having extended mind is quite popular in philosophy since the Clarke's book, as you may know. So I'm, for example, very much coupled to my tablet, where I have thousands of books and lots of notes, etc. And of course, it becomes a part of my thinking. I mean, when I think about something, I just reach for the tablet because I know where I can find things and my notes, etc. Right? So also, when I drive the car, it just becomes part of me. Or when I play the instrument, it just, well, I'm coupled with this instrument. So this it has an influence on me, and I have an influence on the instrument, right? So this is like a closed loop. And if there is a strong coupling, then the system becomes one. And that's a problem with people also. I mean, you may have a strong coupling with your wife or someone else, and then of course, you act in a sense like a, well, entangled couple, right?
The word coupling in that context in English has some connotations that you might not quite be aware of. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I'm not sure what would be the better word for this kind of strong interaction. But if the interaction is strong, we know it from physics, then the systems become entangled and become one. And the whole quantum physics now is now going into quantum computing with entangled pairs of particles somehow, right? So they become one, and of course the bigger systems we have now really quite large groups of particles which are entangled. But people can get entangled. The whole nations can get entangled, right? The two nations that fight with each other all the time, there is no simple linear causality anymore, because, well, everybody is thinking that's their fault, and it just goes back and forth, and there is a strong coupling, and the whole system becomes one. So we have just to acknowledge reality. Well, the world is as it is.
Thank you very much.